Encourage Community Church podcast. We pray that the Lord would use this resource to speak to your heart and that it would bring you defiant hope and joy in whatever season you're in. We hope you enjoy and are encouraged by this message.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I love that testimony because it was something that we saw resolution on, right? Last 3 days of June, that's when it happens. She starts hitting her quota 85% for the year. That's crazy in 3 days. That's nuts. But then, there's always something new. Life doesn't end when God comes through for you the first time. There's more to it than that. There's more life to be lived. And so I love the second part of that, which is that this is in process, but Donna learned from the past experience and is using that in the here and now. That's awesome. And that lines up directly with what we've been talking about with David and where we're going today. But I'm just going to pause for a second here because I've got stuff written, but you know what I found is just like, God's not about our plans. He's not like, we come up with plans and things we expect, and we come up with expectations for God all the time. But God's not about our plans. That's really not where His heart's at. It's not about what we set out to do. What we decided and determined for our life. How we thought it would go. Well, He's not about that. Because He comes from a higher plane of thinking and understanding. He comes from a place that we don't. And His thoughts are so much higher than ours. His love is so much deeper and wider than ours. And who are we to defy Him with our expectations? Yeah. Sometimes I'm that way. I feel like a prayer wasn't answered, and so then I go, where were you, God? He's going, Jack, were you even asking for my will? I mean, you say you're asking for my will, but you thought you knew what it was, and you didn't even check with me on it. It was just what you wanted in the moment. How many times have you gotten in life what you've wanted and realized it's not as good as you thought it would be? Maybe you need what you don't want. But nobody wants to hear that. You just did. Well, I can tell you, as kids are wonderful. Kids are just like great mirrors into our life. I don't know how many times, all right, guys, you need to go to bed. I don't want to go to bed. No, you need to go to sleep. You're tired. I'm not tired. Oh, okay. All right. I've been seeing you complain and whine and do all this for like an hour and a half. You've been tired for like the entire night. Let's go to bed. It's like... So the Father knows best because He's from a higher plane and He knows more. We need that. If we don't have a Father who does that for us, we've really made ourselves God, haven't we? If we just get the things that we want out of life constantly and our expectations always met, it's not really Him that's God at that point, right? It's us. We're the ones who make the rules so that we can have control and feel safe and not have to trust, not have to exercise faith. And if things are always easy, if things are always comfortable, if we never face problems or troubles, if it's all just on a beach, never face winter, never have to go through blazing hot summer. At some point you got to ask yourselves the question, why am I even here? This is this deeper philosophical question. Why am I here? Are you just here to gain as much enjoyment out of life as you possibly can and then leave? Or does God have greater designs and plans, things that give Him glory that you have yet to become aware of? God has destinies and purposes for our life, but it would be very odd for us to assume that we're ready for those destinies and purposes right now. That's an odd thing to assume. And if we don't face challenges and difficulties, if we don't face the Donna situation that she just talked about where she was at the point of potentially losing her job, if we don't learn to trust him in that, how are we going to trust him down the road when God has other purposes and destinies for Donna's life, right? Because God's not done with Donna's life. God has more for her, and he's got more for you. But we got to give up being God. God of our own life. We almost need a declaration of dependence, not a declaration of independence. We really need that. We should probably write it up. Because I was reading, 4th of July came and passed, and I try to make a habit of reading the Declaration of Independence. I know that's a weird thing, but I like history, and that document it's long, but when you read it, you realize, wow, these people were not just like ignorant revolutionaries. They had strong rationale for why they did what they did. They were thinkers. They knew what they were doing. It was planned out, thought through thoroughly. And I almost think like maybe we should do that for ourselves, except the opposite. Instead of writing for, why we're separating from England and declaring independence from the king for how bad he's been to us, maybe we should do the opposite. Write a declaration of why we're even further submitting ourselves to the King of Kings, and why he's done everything that he's done, and he's loved us, and he showed us so much grace and mercy that we didn't deserve. Why is it that I'm going to be more dependent on him? Well, maybe we should write that down and think it out. Too obsessed with our own struggles sometimes to realize his goodness. Yeah, let's jump into David now. So we've been doing this series on David. I think this will be the last week. I think we're going to move to Romans next week. I like the book of Romans. We've covered a lot of David. It's been a fairly long series, and the truth is there's more. I mean, David takes up a large portion of the Old Testament. He actually does. And there's a lot of stories there. And we went through Abraham, which is like the father of faith, right? He's the first in the lineage of Jesus. And then we went to David, who Jesus also comes through David's lineage. And so we're sort of tracking this way. And, if I were to summarize some themes that I see in David's life, we talk about how he's a man after God's own heart. What are some of the themes there? Well, I would say that David had this expectation of God that God loved justice. God wouldn't stand for evil doing. You see that in the story of David and Goliath. It didn't matter how strong David was. Goliath was defying the living God. Can't let that stand. God's going to have justice here. He will pronounce himself mighty, even if through a shepherd. And so David saw justice and knew that God was just. But along with that, I don't know if it's a but, it's more of an and, God also loves mercy. And no matter what David did, he was always coming to God for mercy, even when he failed. He knew that God would honor a humble heart that came to him looking for mercy, and so he would always humble himself and submit himself to God when he made a mistake. Because he knew that God loved mercy. And maybe more than both of those, as much as those things are true, I see in David's life this expectation that didn't make any sense, but it's consistent no matter what he's going through. This expectation that God is on his side. Even when David is not just, he still expects God's on his side. Because it goes with this theme of justice and mercy, right? Where this dependence on God, in some ways, David sees it as though this is God's heart for him. He's depending on him, and God will be on his side. It's a wild thing. And so we get towards the end of 2 Samuel, and we see some of these things kind of coalesce into this really impactful story. It's going to be in 2 Samuel 24. I won't read all of it, but I'll just give you the scoop. Very interesting start to this chapter. It talks about how God became angry with Israel. And it doesn't even really say why. It just says that he became angry with Israel. And we can maybe take some guesses that perhaps they were breaking the covenant that they had with him, or sinning in some way, or devoting themselves to idols in some way. We can take some guesses, but we don't know for sure. It doesn't necessarily state it. But God became angry with Israel, and so he sort of inspires David to do this thing, where David goes out and he takes a census of the land. He tries to figure out how many people are in his kingdom. He tries to measure his wealth and power. And when he starts to do this, there is some pushback from Joab and maybe other leaders that are like, hey, why are you doing this, David? May the Lord increase your numbers even more, but why do you have to go and number them? And nevertheless, David continues to do that. And then after that happens, David realizes what's going on in his heart, perhaps, and he's going, I've sinned against God by counting the number of people. And you might think that's a little strange because, what's the harm in counting people? But there is perhaps a harm in it if you're relying on the people for where you gain your strength. The people are where I gain my power and authority and strength, maybe not God. So let's number them and make sure that I've got security in the number of people and great wealth I've amassed. And so David comes to his senses after doing this census, and he's weeping and praying to God. Or at least I see him weeping, praying to God, saying, I've sinned, God, I've sinned. And this is where we're going to start reading. Well, actually, hold on. One more thing. So he's doing this, and there's a prophet named Gad who comes to him, and Gad says, David, you did something evil in the sight of the Lord. And you've got an option. This is a very interesting story, right? God's doing some strange things here. He gives him 3 options. He says, number 1, the first option is because of what you've done and the evil you've done, you can choose to have 3 years of famine in the land. 3 years, long time. In an agricultural society, that's a big deal. 3 years of famine. Or you can have 3 months of your enemies having victory over you. That's pretty brutal. 3 whole months, they can do a lot of damage in 3 months. Or you can have 3 days of pestilence from me. And so David responds back and he goes, I don't want anything to do with men coming to attack me because I believe that God's merciful. Let's put it in the hands of God. He believes that God is merciful, even though he's just. So he accepts the pestilence, the 3 days of pestilence. And it doesn't really specify exactly what the pestilence is, except that there's an angel, it seems like. An angel of the Lord is coming and bringing this pestilence, and it ends up, over the period of the days, kills 70,000 people. And this is where we'll start reading. And Gad came that day to David and said to him, Go up, raise an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor, and I'm going to mess up this name about 100 times, Araunah, the Jebusite. So David went up at Gad's word as the Lord commanded. And when Araunah, I'm going to mess it up, guys, I can't say it right, Araunah, I think that's it, looked down, he saw the king and his servants coming on toward him. And Araunah went out and paid homage to the king with his face to the ground. And Araunah said, Why has my lord the king come to his servant? David said, To buy the threshing floor from you in order to build an altar to the Lord that the plague may be averted from the people. Now I'm going to just pause here real quick. I sometimes read between the lines in Scripture, or at least ask questions of certain things. It's interesting to me that God chose this person, Araunah, and his threshing floor. Probably, I would make I would say probably. God knew something about Araunah, and he knew that David was going to encounter this thing about Araunah. And in the midst of encountering that, God was going to send a message. I know I'm being vague here, but we'll cover it. God had a plan here. He wanted something displayed, something depicted for our benefit. So, remember David's offering to buy the threshing floor. Verse 22. Then Araunah said to David, Let my lord the king take and offer up what seems good to him. Here are the oxen for the burnt offering, and the threshing sledges, and the yokes for the oxen for the wood. All this, O king, Araunah gives to the king. And Araunah said to the king, May the Lord your God accept you. Wow, look at that. This is a fun story. David is commanded by God, go offer a sacrifice where Araunah is. So David follows the leading of the Lord. He goes, and he's going to go, he asks to sacrifice, he has to buy it, and the way is already paved. Araunah says, here it all is. You get the threshing floor, you get the wood, you get the oxen. David, it's all here for you right now. How cool is that from God? That God would take David and say, yeah, here's where you're going to go, and then provide everything that David needs. I think God knew Araunah was going to do that. You guys don't know where I'm going with this. That's fun. But how many times in your life have you looked for that, right? Following the leading of the Holy Spirit, following where you think God wants you on your path. And expecting that when you do take that step of faith, right, you do follow on the path, that suddenly you'll have this clear perspective. You'll look out and everything will make sense and God will provide everything, every step of the way. Everything will be easy. One of my friends, I think I've maybe said this, one of my friends told me, he's like, I knew that it was God because when I took the step, it was so easy. Like, I'm not so sure about that one. Maybe. Not my experience. So it's all there for David. He could have taken that as confirmation that he heard the word from God, couldn't he? He could have stood there and said, oh, yep, I know I'm on the right path. I know I did what I was supposed to do because look at how God provided for me. But notice David's response. But the king said to Araunah, no, but I will buy it from you for a price. I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God that cost me nothing. So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. Almost too easy. He's going, well, I'll give you what I've got on this. It's funny, you know, guys, when I'm preaching this stuff on David and really anything, I'm living this, or at least trying to. I don't want to preach you a message that I'm not living. And so when I'm taking all this stuff in, it often ends up applying to my life in very meaningful ways. And I'm going to try to explain to you what this meant to me this past week. I have been, I try not to complain about it. I don't want it to be a complaining thing because I think God's in the middle of it, but my job has just been brutally difficult, right? I've kind of explained that over the past couple months, and I thought I had made it through the worst of it, maybe like a week and a half ago. I thought I had climbed the mountain and reached the pinnacle, and now it was going to be downhill. I thought I had gotten through the hard stuff. I thought. And then I come in, I think it was Monday of this week, 8 a.m. email. Anybody who's worked in a job will know what I'm saying when it's 8 a.m. email, fire drill time. And not just one fire drill, two at the same time. Well, there's only one of me, right? And I've got two of these incredibly urgent, pressing matters that I have to deal with now. And then on top of that, some of the work I thought I had completed, well, I did, but they wanted to pile on some more. And it had tight deadlines. Not fire drill deadlines, but get this done within a day and a half deadlines. Which, if that feels like a fire drill to you, that's not for me. That's my normal job, which is why it's been crazy. But the other ones were we need this ASAP. If we don't have it, we're going to have all these findings and issues. Okay, I'm not going to go into the details of what my work is like. And the requirement for me for these fire drills was going to be something that I really didn't want to do, which was set up a bunch of meetings with people who really don't understand what we do. They're the ones causing the problems. They don't understand what we do. They don't understand the business. And they're coming up with all of these things that we have to do. And I've got basically half a day to get with these people and talk them off the edge before they make us do those things that make no sense. And I'm the only person who knows enough to handle it at where I work. And I remember, and this is the anger in my heart Firstly, because I had an expectation, right? Oh, it's easy sailing now. And that didn't come from God. This was just me reading the tea leaves, so to speak. It was me looking at the way things. I wasn't aware of what God was saying. I wasn't asking. And so I had built an expectation. So that came crashing down, and on top of it, I'm just tired of doing this. And to the point, frankly, where the thought entered my mind, do I just quit today? Because this is ridiculous. and like, sort of legitimate thought, like there was about 15% of me that was like, maybe I will. If everyone's going to be crazy, if everyone's going to be nuts, I don't want to be the only sane person in the room. You know what I mean? Like, you guys can have your crazy, I'll back out. And so I went to God and prayed about it, angry. And I said, God, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I'm tired of doing this. I don't want to do it. And when I say I don't want to do it, it's more than just the casual, I don't feel like it. It is, when I say I don't want to do something, what I mean is, I'm not doing it. That's what I mean. And so I'm bringing this to God, and I'm expecting him to take my side and be like, yeah. Because I know what's best, right? That's right. And I felt like he was like, no, Jack, you need to do this. You need to push through this. I don't want to push through this. I'm tired of pushing through this. I don't want to do it. And I'm sitting there at 8 a.m. I've only got like 4 hours to take care of this mess, but I had to stop, and I was like, God, I need like 15 minutes with you. I'm just going to turn my computer off for 15 minutes. We'll get to it when we get to it, but we got to get down to business right now, me and you. And so I started praying about this, and we're going back and forth, right? And I'm going, God, I must be hearing you wrong. No, I'm not hearing you wrong. Push through it. Do it. And I came to this place, and this story popped up into my heart about David. I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God that cost me nothing. And in that moment, I realized something I actually wouldn't do today. I wouldn't do the work assigned to me. I would not do it if it was for me. Certainly not going to do it for my job. That's my mind. Sorry, it's probably not a healthy mindset, but that's real. Just being honest. Wouldn't do it for them. Wouldn't do it for me. Wouldn't do it for my wife and kids. I mean, if I'm talking about like where I'm at in that moment, I wouldn't do it for anybody. But God, I'd do it for you. I'd do it for you. And I'd look back in that time of prayer on my life with him, on how many times I was in the dirt and I had no hope and he picked me up. And how many times I was literally shaken with anxiety, paralyzed with it. And he held my hand and he was with me every step of the way, and we walked out of that place and got healthy and right. And how many times I needed a friend and I was all alone and there was nobody there for me and I was feeling so really depressed, and God was there for me and he was a friend when I had no friends. And how many times we stayed up late into the night just talking about life, about where things are going. Shared experiences. How many times he brought me something that I didn't know I needed. How he pulled me out. How he saved me, raised me, filled me with the Holy Ghost so we could sing the song. I went back and I'm thinking through all these moments, and I'd say, you know what, God, I wouldn't do this for anybody else, but I'll do it for you. This day will be a day of worship from me to you. I'm not going to give you worship that costs me nothing. You know, like and this isn't bad, I think this is great, it's fine. Like, when we come to church, we try to limit the distractions. We try to create a scenario where it's easy to sing songs and praise to worship to God. And that's right and good. But if we only praise when people are making it easy for us to praise, we're giving him worship that doesn't cost us anything. If God, do this scope thing, our scope sometimes of what we're willing, when and where and how we're willing to praise and worship God is like here, right? Maybe. Or maybe here. but I'll give you credit. Maybe it's here, right? We've got a scope. This is where I'm willing to worship and praise. Maybe God wants you out here, though. And he's hanging around out here saying, hey, I'm out here. Jack, I know you don't want to come out here with me today and do this job where you have to help all these people, these wonderful, stupid people. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it. Help all these wonderful people. There it is, just wonderful. I know you don't want to do that, but that's where I'm at today. Your scope's here. Are you willing to come out here? I know that costs you something to come out here. I know that's not cheap. I know that's hard. But will you come out here with me today? And I'm like, oh, God. I don't want to, but you know what? I kind of do want to. Because I'm not going to give you a worship that doesn't cost me anything. And as I was living that day out, that song came into my heart, To Worship You I Live, right? To worship you I live. I live to worship you. Do we live to worship him? I'll tell you whether or not you live to worship him. Do you worship him when life's hard? Do you worship him in the hard of life? Because if you don't really live to worship him. You live to worship him when it's convenient. Well, this is something I'm learning, guys. Hopefully you don't feel like this is me coming down, because I just picked this up this week, okay? I live to worship him. And as I went throughout that day, oh yeah, it was a hard day. It was rough. Had some meetings where I had to really rein people in. Worked out great, and as I'm going through the day, I'm making it my heart like, hey, God, I'm going to make this a joyful expression to you too. I'm not going to just be, I guess I have to do this to worship it. Okay, no, that's just me having a bad attitude. That's, you know what I mean, begrudgingly. That's not worship. And so bringing in my fullness, bringing in my heart. Yeah, this is hard, God, but I'm doing it because I love you. I'm doing it because I love you. I'm doing it because I love you. That's where I'm at. I'm doing it because I love you. You know my heart for you. I'm doing it because I love you. And I know this is helping the people in my life. I know this is helping my business. I know this is probably helping me, even though I don't want to acknowledge it. I'm doing this because I love you, though, God. It's not for any of those people. It's for you. And as I'm doing that, I start getting that joy well. Spring up, oh well, within my soul. Well, this is hard. It's not easy. It's uncomfortable. But that joy well springing up, and by the end of it, I had won the battles for those days. And those were battles, tell you what. But I had won the battles. And I was the only person who could. Just because of the way things worked out. It's just the way it was. If I didn't win those battles, a bunch of other people would have to suffer at a job, and they shouldn't have to, okay? And there was joy in it. Somehow, some way. I think I've never understood martyrs. What I mean by that is, I don't think I could be a martyr. If someone was torturing me to death, I've often thought, would I, give in to that? It's just these thought experiments, ironic, because I'm weird. Would I, denounce Christ just verbally and then later on tell him I'm sorry for doing that? Would I, you know what I mean? Would I break? And I probably got, 0.001% very small understanding of what it probably is to be a martyr. And what that is you're doing this because you love him. I see Stephen with his eyes raised to heaven, with joy in his heart as they're stoning him, because he sees Jesus in that moment. And he sees and he's prophesying while they're killing him with joy in his heart. Why? Well, it's to worship him. His eyes are set on God only. His eyes are opened to who God is. If our eyes are only open to who God is when things are convenient, I would argue you're probably not opening your eyes to God as much as you are to what you want. So, yeah. Well, we'll finish out the story here because I don't like leaving you hanging. Verse 25, and David built there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So the Lord responded to the plea for the land, and the plague was averted from Israel. So it worked out in the end. And this drew my attention to, we're going to be transitioning into Romans, and so we're sort of fast forwarding here, getting to chapter 12. But I think this is at play in David's life. Romans 12, verse 1. And I'm going to pause in the middle of this to kind of read you potential translations here, because there's a couple that are helpful, I think, that give the full meaning of what this is. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God. Some versions say, and maybe more accurately, through the mercies of God. Another version says, in view of the mercies of God. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by or through or in view of God's mercies in your life, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. I think David was looking back on years and years and years of what God's done for him and who God was, saving him from giants and from calamity and from his own sin. I think he had clear view into the mercies of God. When he went to Araunah and he had everything given to him and said, here you go, do your sacrifice. And David goes, in view of the mercies of God, this has got to cost something. There's got to be a sacrifice, and I'm going to give of myself here. Only in view of the mercies of God. We present our bodies a living sacrifice. We present our life, our being. And that's holy and acceptable to God. He loves that. And that is your spiritual worship. Worship that we have here on Sunday, our experience will sort of be limited, I think, by the amount and genuineness of our worship throughout our week. The expression that's in our heart must be practiced. It doesn't just come out during a song. It comes out in the sacrificial giving of yourself, sometimes when you don't want to. And so I threw up this last slide. We'll just run through this quick. What's your cost? David, I won't do it without cost. What is your cost? What do we need to lay down at his feet? I've got some stuff up here. Money for David was what he had to pay, right? It was direct. Do we hang on too closed-handedly to our money? Do we need to open it up a little bit and just say, God, I'm going to entrust you with this. I'm not going to be so worried about this. Because that's the reason why we hang on so tight. It's not because we're like greedy. It's usually because we're anxious. We don't trust. So maybe it starts at the heart, and we have to open up our heart to live a little bit more open-handed and say, God, it's all yours. It's all yours, every part of it. Spiritual worship is letting go of our control of that resource. What about your time? How many time people in here? You really value your time. Better not waste my time. I'm busy. Are you open with that? Maybe that's the cost for you, is being more available to God with your time. I know you've got plans and agendas and things you want to accomplish, and you've got a schedule and you've got it all written out, but maybe open up your little black schedule book. What does God want you to spend time on? What about your energy? We put artificial limits on our energy level, guys, I'll tell you that. I do. I say, I can only go this far. Well, we do have limits. I'm not going to say we're unlimited in what we can accomplish, but what can God accomplish through you? Are you limiting Him with your energy level? I'm tired. I can't do it. Well, hold on. Bring that tiredness to God and see what He wants to do in it, okay? Energy is a thing that God sometimes wants to infuse into you, because when you're weak, then you're strong. First-hand knowledge. What about your opinions? Oh, I know you know everything, just like me. I know you're right. Unless, of course, you disagree with me, then you're wrong. Everyone's got opinions. And the cool thing about reading the Bible is it has a way, if we actually do it genuinely and don't just cram the Bible into our opinion, if we actually read it and just say, God, I'm open. My hands are off it. Teach me. I don't know. Then He starts adjusting our opinions to match His. But there's a cost to that. That's spiritual worship. Do you understand? You're sacrificing your opinions and maybe even your experiences and maybe even what you've learned from your relationships, from people who are close to you. It's hard to lay that stuff down. We primarily, I really believe this about people, we're primarily relational thinkers first, as much as we think we're logical. No, we tend to go, this is our relationship with this person, and therefore I have a belief about that because of my relationship. That's normal. But we got to lay that down to encounter Jesus and his relationship with us and what he wants to teach. That's worship. And the last thing on here, I put sacred cows. And if you could throw that picture up there, just for fun. Sacred cows, we've all got, yeah, there it is. What's your thing that no one gets to touch? This is one that I can't help you on. You're going to have to help yourself. I don't know what it is. I'm almost hesitant to throw things out there because I'm going to probably miss, and then you might go out thinking, oh, I don't have any sacred cows. Well, just because I don't mention it doesn't mean you don't have it, right? I mean, it's like, where's the place where you are so comfortable? Where's your cheese at? Where if somebody moves it, where's my cheese? Who took it? Yeah. Even just as I'm preaching, I feel like God wanted me to also bring this up too. So you might have moments in your life where you encountered that thing that I encountered with my job where you're just like, I don't want to do this today. And specifically, it could be loving your spouse. Listen, we're all married to people if you're married. I don't know anybody who's married to God, right? And sometimes it does require, because they might not, got to be careful here. They're worth it because God loves them, but they might not be doing things that are aligned to you loving them. They might be doing things that are actually aligned to you being a brat to them or being mean to them because they're being mean to you or uncaring. Give love to them as worship to God. Oh, they don't have to provide what you need today. Today, they get unmerited favor. They get unconditional love from me. And I'm doing it as worship, not because I want to, because I might not want to. In fact, I might actually want to do the opposite. But I'm going to offer love to them as worship to you, God, because you've always loved me and cared for me, no matter what they've done. I'm offering it up as worship today. This is my spiritual worship. I'm laying my body down as sacrifice. This is my spiritual worship for you today, God. Yeah. Just for a moment here, I don't want to live here long, Ty, but could we just sing that song, To Worship You I Live? Are you? All right. Yeah, and I just want to encourage you, let's just sing this out over your life, maybe, even over those areas where you don't want to give it up, or where you say, I don't want to do that today. Let's sing it, let's breathe life into that and just sing it out. Say, to worship you I live, God.
Jesus, to worship you I live. To worship you I live to worship you. Jesus, to worship you I live. To worship you I live to worship you. Jesus, to worship you I live. To worship you I live to worship you. Jesus, to worship you I live. To worship you I live to worship you. Oh, oh, oh. Jesus, to worship you, I live. To worship you, I live to worship you. With all I have, Jesus, to worship you, I live. To worship you, I live to worship you. Jesus, to worship you, I live. To worship you, I live to worship you. I live to worship you. I live to worship you. I won't let it cost me nothing. I live to worship you.
So the eyes of the Lord are looking throughout all the earth, seeking for hearts that belong to Him, that are fully His. The eyes of the Lord are searching for you. Give Him your heart. Expand that scope, man. God might have something outside of it. Yeah, I feel like God's saying that somebody here has blinders on, like literally, like you are tunnel visioned. And he's saying, stop. Like, take that off because you're not seeing it. God, I just pray for freedom. We'd be wild again, God. That we wouldn't be, well, that we wouldn't be tame, just like you're not tame. But that we would have the ability to go outside of what's expected. Even with our life. Freedom and victory over this congregation, God. Freedom and victory over every step that we take. You're a good God and you're over us. We depend on you. Yeah. Don't go empty-handed into the week. Hold on to His hand. It's both go empty-handed, but go not empty-handed, right? It's not full of your stuff, it's full of Him. Take His hand, walk through the week.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. We hope you leave here closer to the Lord and encouraged in your faith. If you would like to support our ministry, you can go to themergecc.com and click on the donate button at the bottom of the screen. Thank you and God bless.